Today, I wanted to begin our conversation by really bringing attention to something that I think is very important for all of us as we really move in the direction of helping ourselves heal. And of course, as a physician, as your physician, the most important part of what I want to be able to share with you with what I'm about to talk about in the next few minutes is the fact that I am no different than you. I have challenges if I eat too many chippies. I have challenges if you put a pizza in front of me. In other words, I am not a perfect person that just lives this perfect life. I actually have to work at improving myself. I sometimes have to uh, put myself on a more refocused type of a plan to get myself back on track of things because after all, we live in this amazing world of opportunities, and it's not often that these opportunities that come in our path are fun opportunities like taking a vacation, or sometimes there are opportunities that require work, require stress, require a lot of investment in our time and emotion, and that in itself begins to also detract us from uh, being able to hold ourselves into balance. And so today, one of the primary discussions that I wanted to share with you is the benefits of being vulnerable. And as many of you may know, I am training for my marathon that is going to be for the Chicago Marathon that is going to be taking place on October the 13th, so approximately a month from today. And within the context of my training, I train very differently than traditional training protocols. I train mostly by focusing on my mindset. I train obviously by focusing on detoxifying my body and really begin to go into a very a focused ketogenic type of nutritional plan where I really begin to utilize fat as my main source of energy, which allows me to improve my recuperation time as well as my speed and decrease my inflammation and allow me to flow more effectively through those 26.2 miles and more importantly be able to recuperate fairly quickly after that type of a stressful experience for the body. And so, within the context of that, this past weekend, I was running. I actually developed a little sprain in one of my thighs. And over the last week, I've been trying to do more stretching, do different things. But at the end of the day, here came Sunday, and I had been running on Friday and Saturday. And so here came Sunday, and I still had that general discomfort, although it appeared to be getting better. And so part of my mind is telling me maybe I should take the day off and just let it heal. Another part of my mind is I really need to get more miles in because I don't have that much time. So I need to really step it up a little bit more. And so I went with the latter. And in the process of my running, of course, the first thing that came into my experience is the fact that my thighs started to ache and feel the discomfort. And then I began to recognize within the context of my inner dialogue, right? As I first of all welcomed the fact that I was hurting. I says, well, I was waiting for you, and I'm glad that you joined me to in this run. So it sounds a little bit crazy to talk to parts of your body, but it actually allows me to communicate more effectively and not be afraid or try to resist the sense of discomfort. And in the process of that, I began to really understand that we all have vulnerabilities, and our human state is a vulnerable state. So we could fall, we can get sick. As we're journeying into nutritional optimization and trying to release excess weight, we have vulnerabilities because there's food in front of us that we know that it's probably not the best food for us, but it sure looks good. It's easy because it's in front of us. So there's all these vulnerable aspects of ourselves that continually challenge us. And so as I began to reflect upon that and I'm running, I began to understand that instead of trying to run away from the vulnerability, because most of us, when we feel vulnerable towards something, so in this case, I feel vulnerable because my thigh was in discomfort, and It could be that I feel vulnerable because you put a pizza in front of me and I'm not supposed to be having any pizza, or you put a piece of pie, or it could be that I feel vulnerable because someone is getting a promotion and I'm not, or somebody else might get the promotion instead of me. So vulnerabilities are something that is very common in our experience as part of being human. And as I came to understand that a little bit deeper, I began to recognize that vulnerabilities indeed are part of the human state. But more importantly, those vulnerabilities are really there to help us learn something. And as I began to try to understand what it was that my thigh discomfort was trying to teach me, the more that I dug into that, the more that I recognized that it was really trying to bring attention to the fact that I'm a human being. And as a human being, I have these vulnerabilities. But as you begin to, instead of resisting the vulnerabilities in our life, you begin to welcome them and you begin to appreciate that you have them. For one of the thoughts that I had in my experience was, well, if I wasn't alive, I wouldn't be able to feel this discomfort. So, in some sense, having this discomfort is reassuring me and giving me all the mechanics to tell me that I am alive. And so the vulnerabilities began to take a different experience in my run. And the experience that it began to have in me is that I realized that the vulnerabilities were aspects where of myself that were there to actually help me become stronger. And how does something that is a weakness in your life, which when we think of a weakness in our lives, whether it's my thigh is weaker in my left side than my right side, or whether it's I tend to get hurt easily, so I tend to be vulnerable. I tend to have a weakness, whether it's I tend to have a weakness in terms of my food choices, whatever we perceive as being weaknesses in our experiences in life, I call those vulnerabilities. And when we, instead of resisting those weaknesses. By resisting, I mean trying to cover them up, trying to ignore them, trying to not pay attention to them, trying to make them go away by just ignoring them. The more we do that, the more that I begin to realize that when I try to give resistance to something at that level, I actually give it more power, because the discomfort in my thigh, if I try to make it go away by just thinking of something else, will come back. But when I actually welcomed it, when I actually began to realize that it was there to help me understand that I could actually heal myself, when I began to understand that it was actually there to allow me to appreciate my current human condition, when I realized that it was there to actually hold space for me so that I could grow as a human being, the discomfort went away, completely went away. All of a sudden, my thigh was no longer discomfort. Now, all of a sudden, my elbow was a little achy, or my neck was a little achy, and I could move away from that vulnerability by appreciating that all those aspects of our lives that we consider to be weaknesses, that we consider to be our vulnerable parts, are there to actually make us stronger, are there to actually make us wiser. So as we look at our life and we begin to look at life from the perspective of, oh, I have 30 pounds to release, I have 50 pounds to release. And, I've been through this journey many times, and every time I release weight, I gain it all back. And we begin to kind of beat up on ourselves because of past experiences. We begin to give attention to things that are vulnerable parts in our lives, whether it's emotional challenges, whether it's physical challenges. And I come to understand that the best way to help ourselves heal is, instead of resisting those types of weaknesses and trying to eradicate them from our lives, if we can begin to appreciate them, if we can begin to welcome them into our lives, we can begin to take those emotions that are coming to us, whether it's a hurt emotion, instead of saying, I don't want to feel hurt anymore, if we were to welcome the being hurt, if we were to actually ask ourselves, let me see exactly what that feels like. What does that hurt feel like? Where do I feel it? Well, I feel it right here, and I feel a little achiness right here, and I feel a little sense of nausea, or and you begin to identify all the little details that go into making that sense of discomfort in our lives, Before you know it, as you try to hold that emotion, to try to hold how it feels so you can identify with it, 9 out of 10 times it will begin to dissipate, because emotions are really chemical reactions that are happening in our lives. It's a chemical composition. It's literally a little bit of serotonin, a little bit of norepinephrine, a little bit of dopamine. It's a little alchemy of different chemicals or hormones in our body that create this specific little formula that we call sadness, or that we create this little formula that we call discomfort. They're not they're not anything else other than chemistry in our body. And as we begin to try to understand that chemistry by welcoming it, it begins to resolve. And as it begins to resolve, we can then begin to send energy to those areas in our lives that really can help us heal. So one of the primary aspects that I wanted to share with you is that being vulnerable is indeed a human state, but being vulnerable is not necessarily something that is a burden for us. It's actually there to hold space so that we can become stronger, so that we can become wiser, so that can become more loving, and perhaps sometimes just simply so that we can better understand others. Because when we understand our own vulnerabilities, we can have more compassion for others. And the only way we can have compassion for others is obviously to have compassion for ourselves. And that means that we need to appreciate and be able to go deep into ourselves in the sense of emotions, the sense of discomforts, the sense of vulnerabilities, so that we can begin to grow and begin to elevate the light within ourselves so that we can actually share the love with others.